Okay, hello everyone. This is episode 3, and today we have a special guest that's going to talk about meditation. So I'm Alex. I am the co-host, and turn it over to Rich, who'll dig into the discussion.
Thank you, Alex. I am Rich Weil, the founder and director of Transformation Weight Control, and our podcast, before I introduce our guest, is all about giving you the most up-to-date, authoritative information to dispel all the myths that you hear about and present really interesting topics to you. So that's what we're going to do. And I want to thank my co-host Alex, because without it, we would not have any technology at all, because it took me about a year to learn how to use Zoom. And knowing that Alex is running the show, because he's an IT, he's a chat GPT of computer science, let's say that. And so I know the thing goes well. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing our guest tonight. She is a colleague of mine, and we have been working together for more than a year at Transformation Weight Control, Dr. Megan Pietrucha. And she is a licensed clinical and sports psychologist, so she has a really wide range. She is an athlete from college, and as I said, a staff member at Transformation. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Illinois Wesleyan University and her master's and doctoral degrees in clinical psychology from the Illinois School of Professional Psychology at Argosy University. She is certified in industrial and organizational psychology, which I'm going to ask you about in a moment, from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. She is also a member of the Association for Applied Sports Psychology and specializes in weight loss, eating concerns, body image, mindfulness, mood disorders, life transition, stress management, performance psychology, anxiety, depression, and college and athlete mental health. And it has been a pleasure to work with her all this time. And I will say one last thing, and then I'm going to let her introduce herself. When I was reviewing all resumes and everything, and Megan had applied to work with me, the thing that sold me on her was that on her website, it says willpower is bull, and then she says the actual word. Well, there's a little asterisk, and we are on the same page with that. It doesn't just wash over you, willpower. I knew I was in the right place with her. So I turn it over to Megan, and you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll start with some questions that I have for you. If you have anything to say, or you want me to just get started?
Sure. Yeah, I can just say one or two more things. So yeah, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to chat with you today. It's also been a pleasure to work with you for the last over a year now,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, it's over a year.
We had our year anniversary.
Uh-huh.
So happy anniversary. And yeah, it's been great getting to know the people in the groups. I'm also a psychologist, a certified psychologist through PsyPact. So I'm able to offer, I have my own private practice in addition to working with Rich. And then I'm able to offer services across state lines for states that are within the PsyPact.
Right. So she's saying PSYPACT, and if you go to that.gov, you'll find out if your state, and there's like 42 states that are, so likely she can counsel you.
There's only a handful that are not. Yeah.
And she is very, very effective. And this is my 4th year of doing this work, and I have worked with lots of psychologists, and she is among the top of the top. She's very, very skilled and has a very wide range, and it's really a pleasure to work with her. It truly is. So the topic for tonight is mindfulness, weight loss, and preventing regain. And I want to start by asking you, we use the word mindfulness a lot. And, I remember the first time I heard it, I thought this is some sort of woohoo kind of thing, and there's no science to it, and blah, blah, blah. So give us the lowdown. What is it?
What is
all yours?
Sure. Yeah. And
because I thought, and it's all over your website too. You talk about mindfulness a lot, and you're really good at it, which I'm going to give an example later.
Sure. Okay, great.
We'll also need that website for the show notes. I'll include that there. So if anybody who's listening wants to go and see it.
Okay.
My website?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please do. So yeah, I think a lot of people hear mindfulness, especially in recent years, it's become like a buzzword, right? And so a lot of people still kind of don't know exactly what it means. They attribute it or they equate it with meditation, which is they're not exactly the same. Mindfulness is more of like the philosophy. Meditation is more of that kind of like putting it into practice, or one way that you can put mindfulness into practice. So we'll back up today and talk more about kind of like the overarching philosophy of mindfulness and what it is. But yeah, I think a lot of people think that it's very like woo woo, very soft. But sports, I think once the world of sports started to kind of embrace it and talk about it more openly, I remember the coach of the Seattle Seahawks was one of the first people several years ago that started putting it into like conversations when he would be interviewed. And a lot of professional golfers, tennis players have been talking about the use of sports psychologists and mindfulness. So I think it's starting to become a little less woo-woo, a little bit more understood as not so much of like us, like a lot of people think that it's like soft to be mindful, but I think it's really a strength, right? Like it really is honing a lot of the mental skills that we talk about with weight loss as well as with athletics, right? So mindfulness in general, do you want me to give you the definition of what it is? Okay, so mindfulness, and this definition kind of comes from John Kabat-Zinn, who's like the guru of mindfulness, but it's the practice of paying attention purposefully. So being in the present moment, being open to the present moment with a sense of curiosity and trying as best possible, which is maybe the hardest part for me personally, but to suspend judgment while you're in that present moment. So being more curious than judgmental. So it's this increased awareness of what's going on around you as well as what's going on with you internally, your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations, all of that.
So, hearing what you're saying, and I'm sitting here and I'm a listener, when would I know or think, you know what, maybe I ought to see somebody who knows a lot about mindfulness because I'm struggling? Is it that I'm struggling in something? What's the clue that
Sure.
that says to me, you know what, you need some mindfulness?
Well, I think mindfulness is beneficial for all of us, whether we're struggling or we're doing great in life or somewhere in the middle, right? I think mindfulness is a skill that is helpful and has been shown research wise to be a very broadly applicable mindset and set of skills that go along with it. So I think if you are struggling with something like anxiety, depression, weight loss, eating concerns, even other substance use or addictive behaviors, mindfulness can definitely be a helpful intervention for
Okay.
you. And it would probably come along with some other things too if you were to kind of seek out professional help. But like I said, I use it a lot with the athletes that I work with. I think it's great for just everyday functioning, right? Just to be more present. I think in our society, we're so overloaded with stimulus, right? Like we're in the age of TikTok where everything is 5 seconds and you're swiping or scrolling constantly. And so our brains are so overstimulated that mindfulness helps us slow down to
Okay.
appreciate
All
where
right.
we're
Good.
at, who we're with, all of those things.
Because that was what I was going to ask you, because sort of the mechanism of mindfulness, how is it working? And I was going to say, we know that all the things going on in our brain are happening. You can measure in milliseconds, 1/1000th of a second. So I think what you're saying is, this is slowing that down a little bit. It's sort of like a pinball machine in our head, like when we see people on our program, right? I mean, they have very chaotic thoughts about losing weight and meal plan and all that sort of thing. And so what you are saying is slow it down and be in the moment. Is
Yes.
that a fair?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%.
And you had mentioned it's sort of from a Buddhist philosophy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it definitely does have its roots in Buddhism. But yeah, and so like John Kabat-Zinn, linking right now, putting me on the spot, but thinking I'm like looking at my bookshelf. Hansen is another author that writes about Buddha's brain. So he integrates science with mindfulness and the brain science that goes into mindfulness. Yeah, there's a lot of really, really good authors that will, talk at
And
length.
just real quick, what do like athletes do with mindfulness? Like, from my perspective, There's two use cases that I use it for, or try to use it for, probably unsuccessfully. One is being more present when I try to eat. So I did that Raisin exercise and all of that.
I wanted to bring that up. I'll go with it, but then I want to talk with Megan about that a little bit
Sure.
more. But go ahead.
Right. So that's one case. Like I found myself back in November where I wouldn't remember what I ate or when, and most of my meals were like I'd get up, I wouldn't even sit down. I'd just, put something away and keep going. So that was one big change for me. And the second one was, and I mean, I've been on and off doing it for years, just meditating, just trying to kind of concentrate on my breath for 10 minutes at a time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I get anything out of that practice, but what else is there, like in terms of, especially for athletes? Because I do run, like we were talking about before the podcast started, that we had leg day today.
I felt a little guilty because I didn't do any legs today, and these guys are talking about Roman deadlifts and squats and goblet squats and all. Frankly, if you didn't know anything about what they were talking about, you'd think they were like talking about like being on the space shuttle or something. They're like, I mean, these
So
guys.
can it help me block out the pain of leg day?
Well, so interesting that you say that, because mindfulness would help you kind of acknowledge the pain that you are experiencing with leg day, while also allowing you to kind of like appreciate the work that you're putting into it in the moment, right? Like it's not going to block it out, but what you can do is you can use mindfulness to kind of like gently shift your attention if you choose to, right? So like you said you were a runner. I enjoy running as well. And so, on the days where like running feels harder, right? Like not all runs are easy. Sometimes like you go out for a run and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've never run before. And it just feels like your body just can't, it's just not working, not as well oiled. And those are the days where I find that I use mindfulness when I'm running, where I am kind of paying attention to that. I'm not trying to block it out because it is what it is, right? Like it's not really going to go away. But what I do is I just kind of like gently take notice of it. And then what I will do is I will kind of like mindfully shift my attention to something else. Some kind of like, oftentimes it's like a mantra, especially when I was training for triathlons. I would have this mantra. It was like the Finding Nemo mantra: just keep running, just keep running, just keep running, just keep running, especially on the days that were the hardest or during the mileage that was the highest, when I was like, oh my gosh, I have 2 more miles. How much longer is this going to take? So it was like, you can gently shift. But I think mindfulness is about, again, kind of like allowing the experience, not trying to push it away, right? It's like understanding that it's there. It is what it is. And if we play into the pain, right? If we focus on the pain, then what happens usually to your mindset? Like when you're running, Alex, what happens?
It gets worse and worse.
Yeah. So it helps us be able to acknowledge that it's there, and then we can use mindfulness to tell ourselves like, okay, I'm consciously going to choose to think about something else right now. So there's mindful distraction.
Right.
That's still.
Yeah. There's a little bit of acceptance and commitment therapy there, right?
Yeah, I think the acceptance part of mindfulness, right? Like is accepting that things are the way they are, not trying to make them be something that they aren't, right? So yeah, it kind of overlaps. That part of it definitely overlaps the acceptance part of ACT.
Because the way I kind of see it is sort of, and I see you want to say something, Alex, but you're kind of describing how your brain can get hijacked by your thoughts, the negative thoughts, and get fused to this is too hard, or this is, I remember I was at the 90th mile of a century bike ride, and I stopped for the final water break, and I felt like, I don't want to do it. And she said, well, you could go take the subway, but that's going to be a 3-mile walk. And then when you get off the subway, you're going to have to walk home. So you might as well just ride the last 10 and shut up. And that did it for me though. But, but it was like I was just locked into this space that I wasn't doing what you're suggesting. Alex, you wanted to say something that looked like.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the runs that I do, I'll tune pretty much everything out. I don't know, it might be a weird thing, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks and things like that. And I'm in IT, so I do a lot of certifications. So I'll get the books, whatever I'm studying, on audio, and that's what I listen to a lot of the times. And honestly, I don't remember any of it when I'm running. I remember it when I'm taking the test. But that also, I don't remember a lot of my runs either, for exactly the same reason. I'm completely tuned out And I don't know if that's mindfulness or the opposite, complete opposite of it.
Maybe it's a little bit of both. I think it depends on the mechanism that you're kind of like using to distract yourself into like a different headspace. I read one, this tangent, but I read once that there's two different kinds of exercisers that kind of tune inward. So for example, like runners that can't run with headphones or listening to anything at all because they need to be able to like pay
That's
attention
me.
to their body, hear their breathing. I'm kind of half and half. I usually do like one headphone in and one headphone out because
So
because I like the
one half of
distraction.
your brain is doing one thing and the other half's doing
Basically, yeah, I
another.
bounce back and forth between the two, like paying attention and not paying attention. And then there's other kind of like the other like dissociating kind of runners that like to just kind of pay attention to something else, like be completely distracted. But I think it takes mindfulness to be in both of those headspaces because you're choosing, especially if you're mindfully choosing to engage in that distraction, to not pay attention to what your body is doing because you're like, I don't want to. Tuning into this makes my mind race and it makes the run worse. It's helpful for me to tune out and tune into something else. That's a mindful choice, right? I think it depends on the way in which you approach it, the underpinnings, perhaps.
On your website, you talk about being in the zone.
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking about now, or is that something different? And I also was thinking about
it's
flow.
related. Yeah, yeah. I think
Tell
it's
us what the
related.
zone is. Tell us what the zone is,
The
because
zone is like the place of optimal performance, right? Like, so whether you're in, it could be zone and flow state are kind of like the same thing, right? So two different words to describe the same thing. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is the psychologist who wrote about flow, right? And so he wrote about kind of this optimal experience where if you've ever been in the midst of something, whether it's sports or it could have been a hobby or music or running, right? And you find yourself where like time feels suspended and you just feel like this kind of high. And you might look down and it's like, oh gosh, I've been doing this for an hour. Wow, that felt like only 5 minutes passed, and
right.
you're just you're in this place of optimal performance, right? Where everything feels good. And so mindfulness, I think, it's different, but I think mindfulness is a vehicle that can help facilitate a flow space or a flow state or a state of optimal performance, no matter what it is, like what you're doing, whether you're gardening or running or listening to music.
It also kind of sounds like you're saying there are no judgments here. You're not judging yourself because, oh, I'm not a good runner because I'm in pain, or I'm too slow, or having those kinds of thoughts, or I'm not winning.
Absolutely.
Is it that? Is it like no judgment?
Yes. So a non judgmental attitude is one of the key components of mindfulness. And so, yeah, the goal, and like I said, this is the hardest one for me personally as like a type A, like former
Well,
athlete.
you're talking to the right guy right over there.
Yeah. So if you tend to be type A, this one might be the sticking point for you. But yeah, it's doing the best you can to try to suspend that internal sense of judgment, trying to not. And then what happens a lot of the times, especially if you're type A, and Alex, you mentioned like you try to meditate, but you sometimes don't feel like you do it very successfully.
Well, it's almost like I mean, I can start a 10-minute session, but sometimes it's almost it. I get anxious that it's not over yet,
Yeah.
so I'm not
You start
sure.
thinking about your
It's
thinking and overanalyzing
yeah,
the
it's. I'm like,
process.
hey, I have to get back to whatever it is that I was doing.
Yeah.
This 10 minutes is a waste of my time, and it just gets worse and worse. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then sometimes we start judging when and then we're like, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing that right now. I'm supposed to be focused, right? And so, yeah, it's this practice of suspending judgment because especially, and we talk a lot about this in the groups with
We
the
do. The weight
weight
loss
loss groups,
groups.
right? Is like learning how to suspend judgment builds a space where you can then replace that experience of shame that usually comes with judgmental thoughts, right? Or overly perfectionistic thoughts, that emotional experience of shame, you can replace that with more self compassion, more gentleness, more grace for yourself. And once you kind of like you take that layer of shame off, people talk all the time, even especially like my clients are like, wow, I didn't realize how much energy that kind of like shaming part of my brain was taking up, was creating so much anxiety. And now I feel like I just have more energy on a daily basis to do things without feeling like I'm berating myself all the time.
I mean, we observe like depletion of resilience and perseverance when this happens, right? This judgment, this
Absolutely.
kind of all or nothing thinking that it's never enough. And I mean, that's what we see. I run groups with Megan all the time, and we're constantly hearing this sort of thing in the weight loss groups that,
I'm an expert on that. You
I
know
know
that.
you are. I know you are. I know you are. But I'm glad we're addressing it. But you are. But you're not alone, Alex. You're not alone. Yeah, I'm gonna break like well, we're not subject to HIPAA laws here, so I can just say Alex is telling me, we've become good friends. We've known each other for more than 20 years. We've never met in person, and in fact, for the
We
first
will.
we will, but in the first like 10 or 12 years, there was no Zoom or Skype or anything, so we didn't even know what each other looked like. But Alex said, he's lost a lot of weight, over 56 pounds,
Something,
something like
yeah.
that. And you know what? The first thing he said to me in the email, Megan, is, I've still got a long way to go. I congratulate him. And he says, I've still got a long way. That's the first thought. So would that be like the opposite of that? I mean, it's certainly all or nothing. It's certainly judgmental.
Mhm.
Is it kind of flying in the face of being mindful and owning your victory? Or how would you kind of describe it? Because
I think
a
it
lot of people
depends.
do this.
Yeah, I think it depends. Alex, how does it feel when you say I still have a long way to go?
I've never really considered how it feels. It's more of a, I don't know. I would consider it a factual statement. And I still have, another 20 pounds to go, and then I really have to kind of figure out how to, not overeat.
Hmm.
I'm I'm sure, given an opportunity, if there's something in the house, I will eat it.
Okay. So what you just said kind of makes me think that, yeah, Rich, like for this is like, yeah, a little less mindful, right? Like this is more, Alex, kind of like I heard you start to go down the negative spiral of thoughts here, right? And so for you, when you say I still have a long way to go, yeah, it does sound like it has the potential to deplete your momentum towards your goal, right? Because like Rich is saying, like you kind of bypass the ownership of the success, allowing it to be like, yeah, you know what? I did do that. That is awesome. And I still have a goal that I'm working towards, right? That's different, right? When you say like, yes, I'm awesome and I'm still moving forward, right? That's different than, oh, I still have a long way to go, without acknowledgement of the successes and the positives. And we hear this all the time in
All the
our
time.
groups.
And it's very subjective, because when Alex says it's the truth, when you ask him, well, what do you think or feel when you say you have a long way to go and he has 20 pounds to go? People in our program would kill for that, right? So it's all relative. And so, how do you really determine that 20 is a long way to go? But what you're saying is to own the victory, as I'm saying, and that's closer to the truth than, because I could argue all day with you. What do you mean by long? I mean, we have people who have 200 pounds to lose. So you've got 20.
It's not so much about the number or the outcome. It's more about kind of the internal process that's happening for you, right? So if you're saying, oh, I still have a long way to go, and then it triggers these other thoughts about like, oh, now I have to make sure that I don't do this and I do that, or this is my, and it starts to trigger more of like the negative associations and some of the negative thought spirals, then yeah, like going back to say like, okay, mindfulness can help me build a sense of resiliency, more self-compassion, and like we talk a little bit about like grittiness, right? Like that ability to persevere while still owning our victories, right? To push forward, to not be done, right? And it's great to not never feel like you're done, right? To always
Well,
wanting to,
because there is no end point, right? I mean, there
right,
is none.
right,
We just are
right.
going forever, right? So, Megan, the way that Alex is describing it, we're very familiar. I mean, we hear this all the time, right? It's like the most insidious thinking style that we observe. Well, it is.
I need to change it, but I don't know. I don't know
Well,
how.
that was my next question. Megan, I showed him the triangle when he says, when people in the program say they're going to try to walk a mile, and I ring this triangle, literally, it's in my other room, because what I want is for a bell to go off in your head that the word try is
Period.
sort of a hedge against succeeding, instead of saying, I want to, or I will. So what should go off in Alex's head, sort of like almost like Pavlov's dog, when he has a thought that's going to deplete him, like a non-mindful, oh, I still have a long way to go kind of thought. What would be the cue for him, or what should he? Yeah, how should it come to him that he's
Yeah.
yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it comes to us. It depends on the person, right? The way in which it comes to you. But mindfulness. So let me back up just a sec. So mindfulness, one of the other kind of like benefits of mindfulness, right, is increasing the awareness of what is happening to us internally. So mindfulness of thoughts, mindfulness of emotions, mindfulness of behavior, and mindfulness of bodily sensation. So there's four. Really a lot of times, especially in the groups, I'll talk about three, right? Like the connections between thoughts, emotions, and behavior. But I like adding the fourth one in there, so making it more of a diamond, right? Like the connection between all four of these points. And so mindfulness, the first thing with mindfulness is, I think the easiest inroads is probably mindfulness of thought, to start there for most people. That or body, right? Because what we oftentimes will start with mindfulness is like, okay, this is a really nice idea, like, but how do I do it? Like, what is, and I think that's kind of what your question is getting at, Rich, is like, how do I use mindfulness? How do I make it useful for this? Like, to notice, like, what is this thought, or what is this trigger? So the first thing with mindfulness that I often will teach is like, okay, so first I teach kind of like the tenets, the overarching philosophy, and the basic tenets that we talked about, with being present, suspending judgment, being curious, being in the here and now. And so how do you start being in the here and now? The first thing that you do, that we all can do at any given moment, anytime, whether you're in the middle of a board meeting, or in the middle of a century race, or you're just sitting at your desk, or folding laundry, whatever it is to pay attention. You have to practice paying attention. And again, that intentional component, right? It's intentional. So it's an intentional practice. And what I encourage people to do is to pay attention to your breathing. Your breath is your anchor, and that's the thing that you can do, right? That's the skill. This is a skill that we all have, and we can do it anytime, is to just start to tune in to your breath. So if you want to do that right now, even, right, like, and just take a moment, and we do this a lot in the groups, right? We'll do like just a brief breathing practice to kind of like ground people in the group, especially the mindfulness groups. But just start to pay attention to your breathing. And as you start to pay attention to your breath becomes an anchor for you. So when you notice, and then you can start to build on that, where like, okay, so now if you're just sitting with your breath and you just practice bringing your mind gently back to your breath every time it wants to wander, because it will want to wander in every which way direction, right? And so once you notice your brain start thinking about that, I have to start dinner, or did I thaw the meat for dinner, or I have to do this thing later, or I left the laundry in the wash. Okay, my breath is an anchor. I pay attention to my breath, and I bring my attention back to the breath, right? And so it slows the brain down, it slows the body down. Physiologically, what you're doing, especially if you can pair some deep breathing eventually, then we'll build on that with like deep breathing, right? So that's more of like the meditative component related to mindfulness. So then we can start to pair in deep breathing. And this is where it starts to become a nervous system regulation skill, right? Because what you're doing with the deep breathing and slowing your brain down is you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your body's relaxation response, basically telling your brain, hey, it's okay, right? Like, you slow your cortisol down, you tell everything, I'm good, I'm okay right now. And so the deep breathing, the breathing, the breath becomes the foundation of building everything out. So then you can build on that with more awareness of body, with deep breathing, different types of relaxation exercises, meditations, even mindful walking, right? Like integrating mindfulness into physical activity, such as like doing a mindful walk or a mindful run. And then you can build it into mindfulness of emotion, where now we're starting to pay attention to how our emotions are connected to our thoughts and connected to our behaviors. We start to pay attention to our thoughts. And this is getting back to Rich's question, is once you start to become more aware of what's going on internally, because first you have to hear it, right? If you're not hearing what's happening in between your ears and the kind of dialogue that's going on, it's going to be impossible for you to find that inroads. So first you have to slow down and practice the art of just being present. And then you can tune inwards to the thoughts and practice mindfulness of thoughts. And once you start becoming more aware of, oh, I do say that to myself. Oh, yeah, I can hear a lot of the negative language, right? Then that starts to become kind of branching into perhaps like a CBT intervention where now we can start to
Just explain
identify.
what CBT is.
Sure, cognitive behavioral therapy. So CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. And so that becomes more of, we tune now into like the thoughts that are connected to your behavior. So once we can hear the thoughts, now we can work with them. And if you start to notice that there's patterns to your thoughts that are not very helpful for you. So a lot of people will tend to, again, if it's hard to suspend judgment, you might find that you have a lot of shame inducing thoughts, such as like, I can't, I shouldn't, I must, I have to, I didn't, right? Um, the Albert Ellis, we talked about this, the famous shoulding all over yourself, right? So when you just tell, oh, I should do this, I shouldn't do that, why did I do this, right? Albert Ellis was famous for kind of coining that funny phrase. But you start to hear, right, some of the ways in which your thoughts are not helping or not leading you to the outcome or the behaviors that feel more productive. Long answer to your question, but does that make sense?
It does for me, but I mean, I would even struggle to identify what is negative versus.
Right.
Sure.
I think something that Megan said. You said a number of things. I made some notes that I want to clarify, or have you clarify a little bit more. This issue, for one thing, and I think he just hit on it, was the difference between a thought and a feeling, and understanding the interaction between them. Because people kind of say, they'll say, I feel like going to the movies, let's say. Well, that's not really a feeling. And we get confused between what a thought and a feeling is. And what you're describing is the interaction between the thoughts and the feelings, that one drives the other, that they are separate issues. So if Alex says, I have a long way to go, he might feel shame or something along those lines. And what you're saying is, if you do the mindfulness and the breath, it gives you some time for some maybe consequential thinking, or just, like you said, asking yourself, is your thought helping you? Is it true? That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like mindfulness gives us the opportunity to slow this process down, right? A lot of the times in CBT, there's a term for it, right? Like a lot of the times our thoughts are just kind of happening, right? And we don't even, like you're saying, we don't even notice or differentiate between a thought, a feeling. It all gets kind of melded together because it's happening so fast. And CBT calls this like automatic thoughts. So like we'll have all these automatic thoughts that happen, and without the awareness of them, yeah, they're hard to intercept, right? So that's what mindfulness does. Mindfulness slows it down and gives this little window of opportunity, little points where you can intercept the chain of events, right? I mean, a lot of times in the 26-week group that we run, this is like one of the first modules that we do, where we talk about behavior analysis, and we kind of create this chain where we start to slow people down and help people identify, what were some activating event, like what was the event. A lot of times we'll be able to see like the outcome, and we get frustrated by like what happened. Oh yeah, I overate, and then the scale went up, and then we kind of hyperfixate on that, right? The outcome. And we forget that there were all of these things that kind of led up to that. And so we like walk that backwards very slowly into like, well, what prompted all of that? Were there any things that made you vulnerable to a situation or a trigger where maybe you did find yourself overeating or overindulging? Like what was the trigger? Like, was there a situational event as well? What were you thinking? What were the thoughts associated with that event? What did it make you then feel, which then led to the behavior, which then led to the consequence? So mindfulness gives us this opportunity to be like, yeah, like let's play it out, and let's like find these inflection points where then once we know how these things are linked, I can maybe create some different coping skills to meet each one of these points along the way, where like behaviorally, I can make different choices about what foods I have available, or emotionally, I can choose to develop some emotional coping skills to help me regulate. I can develop a different way of thinking about the situation that is maybe less negative, that won't kind of lead to shame, which then kind of promotes the overeating behavior. So it kind of, mindfulness draws this out and helps us identify how all of these things are linked when we can be present with each part of it. Does that make sense?
I've had many conversations about this sort of thing with Alex, and one of the things that Alex said that other people do as well is he feels like it just you have to be really tough on yourself, and you have to kind of, bare knuckle it. And that's the only way that there'll be, this idea of being kind or compassionate isn't really where his head is at. And you're not, we've had this conversation 1,000 times, he and I.
Yeah,
Athletes all the time.
I'm a big believer in that. If I want to be kind to myself, I'm going to order Uber Eats and I'm going to sit on the sofa and do nothing.
This
You're
is
not going to get me to have a leg day or go outside and run.
right.
So unless I'm tough on myself and say, get your ass out of bed at 2:45 and go run,
I have these
it's not going to
conversations.
work. If I wanted to be kind, I'd stay in bed and sleep.
Yeah, I literally just had this conversation with a client of mine this week, and we talked about it in group this week too. Yeah, it's hard, right? Because it's interesting because like this is where I would encourage people to do a little bit more of a deep dive into how did food become associated with kindness, with emotional coping in that way, right? So sometimes people have to do a little bit more digging psychologically back into their family history and whatnot, like all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I talk about this with athletes too, and it flies in the face of like the traditional athletic mindset, right? And to be quite honest, I think a lot of it is also an American mindset, right? Of like industriousness is like, we have to work hard. There's no breaks. Athletes, the no pain, no gain mentality, right? And like letting up feels like weakness, or it feels
It,
like it's an opportunity for me to backslide, right? If I'm not hard on myself, then I won't move forward. And I think what a lot of people figure out is that may have worked for them for a time, but eventually that stops working or stops working as well, right? What it doesn't allow in it, well, what it one always promotes is the sense of I'm not good enough now, so I always have to like focus on being better. So there's sometimes there can be kind of like an entrenchment in the not good enough now, nothing feels good enough now, right? Which is, on one hand, I get it, again, as an athlete, right? Like always wanting to be better. Is that a bad thing? No, not necessarily. But if it promotes a feeling of frustration, shame, right? If that starts to become more overwhelming or kind of gets its meat hooks into us, then it's not motivating anymore either. So a lot of times, yeah, I talk with athletes and people with food issues all the time. So this comes up all the time. It's like, okay, well, and a lot of times I will just point blank ask people, so how's that working for you right now? Right? Like, it seems like maybe it worked and I get how it developed in that way, but is it really working for you anymore? In what ways is it working and what ways is it not working? And then we can kind of tweak it. You can keep the parts of it that still feel helpful for you. You don't have to erase it completely and go completely, Zen Buddhist, everything is okay all the time, self-compassion guru, but we do have to kind of balance the push with knowing when is good enough, right? And that is an art. That is definitely an art.
it seems as though, and we've both observed this, Megan, there's this idea that if you accept the way things are, it means there'll be no more progress.
Yeah.
If you just accept this. And that's not true. It's in fact the opposite. It empowers you to accept the conditions as they are, and then you can move. Is that hitting the nail on
Yeah,
the head?
absolutely. Yeah. And the scariest part of that, I feel like, and this is where I work with a lot of my individual clients on this too, the scariest part of that belief is in the letting go. Once people do let go, they do figure it out for themselves eventually, right? That like the worst thing that they thought was going to happen doesn't actually end up happening, or even if it did, it's not to the extent that they thought it would, right? It's not as scary as it's been made out to be in our heads. And but the act of like just dropping the rope, instead of constantly having to, play this game of tug of war, the actual kind of letting go is the scariest part. And so I sit with people in that all the time, and we practice it in session, and then they go out and then I'm like, okay, here's your homework for this week. Go forth. And a lot of times they come back and they're like, okay, yeah, it actually wasn't that bad. And that's where I think this internal, with eating issues in particular, I work with folks along the spectrum of eating issues, but I think the one theme that resonates across the board is, like you said, learning a sense of empowerment and trust in yourself versus a need to control and over control, right? So empowerment and trust, I think, is when you drop the rope, you start to build like this internal way of, like being like, okay, I trust my decisions, versus having to have kind of like you said, a stranglehold or kind of white knuckling our behaviors or ourselves, because innately what we're telling ourselves is like, I don't trust myself to make the right decision if I give myself grace.
Definitely interesting. Are there any books, or how do you figure all this out?
It doesn't happen overnight, right? It's a process for sure. Yes. I think, there are many books out there, and mindfulness, and mindfulness in eating. There's some really, I'm trying to think of I should have had it lined up on my desk, but I do have a book. I think you're familiar with it, Rich. It has a green apple on the front. It's very small, and it's very, for lack of a better word, like digestible, because the chapters are very short. There's always something to think
Food.
about. There's
Are
often
you,
an activity.
is it food for thought? Is that what you're thinking of?
It might be that one. I think Susan Elbers, I think, is the author.
Yes. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's a really good one. And
And
I
we
think,
and we can get those from you, and we can put them in, right, Alex? We'll be able to put them in the once she lets
Show
us know.
notes?
Yeah, the
Yes,
show
we
notes.
can
We
include
can
that.
add
Yep.
it, so she can give us a list of resources. That
sure.
would be very
Yeah, that'd be
helpful.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, Megan, you're getting through his blood-brain barrier a little bit here, because I can see he's really thinking about this, and he's a smart guy, and he wants to do the best that he can, and I genuinely understand that he's confused by some of this, because it's so
Hugely.
it's so hardwired the other way that he can't, that it's, and you're not the only one. I'm not picking on you. That it's just like, I describe it like a heavy pencil line on a piece of paper, and you erase it, but you always see a remnant of the old, and so you can make new wiring, but the other still, you're competing with the other still. As Megan says, it's scary to let go, to experiment at least with the other, and to really find out and look at your history and say, now wait a second, maybe he's right or she's right. Because I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm never really getting to where I want to be. Like, I keep repeating the same thing over and over, and I don't look at the evidence. I'm not looking at truth. Your truth, we call this like a confirmation bias. You're looking at information that will satisfy your thought, but your thought may not really be true. But because, like Megan, so your brain is, milliseconds is what's going on in your head. Neurons and all these things are firing on all cylinders. So it's impossible in the moment to kind of slow yourself and say, well, wait a second, maybe they're right. Maybe, if I look back over the course of my decades, I've done the same thing over and over, and I'm expecting a different outcome. And, as they say, is the definition of insanity.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah,
and,
I've
and
heard that.
yeah, well, there's some real truth to that, and our job, Megan and I, in the groups, is to point these things out and to guide people. We're not magicians. We're very, very smart. Don't get me wrong. We, we're really good at it, but we're not magicians, and we don't have a magic wand. And so our job is to sort of point these things out and guide you. And if we can gain your trust so that you're willing to experiment with some of the things we're suggesting, you might make some progress. And because you really do need to think about, this hasn't worked in the past. This has never worked, really, when I really think about it. I believe it has, but not really. You
What
know
we're
what I
asking
mean?
people to do is to dismantle some of their belief systems and to better understand, yeah, like where did these beliefs originate in the first place? Because yeah, are they really, and then to evaluate them. Yeah, are they really working for me in the way that I want them to?
Yeah,
Maybe again, maybe they did at one point, but are they any longer? Maybe there's facets of it that do, and but some
right.
parts don't
Yeah.
anymore. So doing that evaluation. And you mentioned the brain wiring too, and we haven't even talked about that part of it. But with mindfulness, first of all, like the openness, right? You have to be open again, and that curiosity, right? So those two tenets of mindfulness, of openness, willingness, and curiosity, right? Being willing to examine, being willing to understand, being willing to kind of take in new information and potentially challenge, or at least question our own frame of reference. So that's a big part of it. And then, we didn't even talk about kind of like I touched on it a little bit, like biologically or neurologically, like what is mindfulness doing for our bodies? But it is regulating our nervous system. And as Rich mentioned, like the pencil line, it literally is creating new pathways in your brain. Right? Shown, right? Like with a course of mindfulness, an intentional practice of mindfulness over the course of, I believe it's like 8 to 12 weeks or something like that, brain scans have shown that there is new wiring in the brain. But what I think people get caught up in is that it takes time to first unwire before we can rewire, right? We have to almost like unlearn before we can relearn some of this stuff. But it happens, right? Like, and once it starts, and that's when like that's when the neurons are connecting, right? It's like all of a sudden you see, and we've seen this in groups, like all of a sudden people have the aha moment in the group, and we're like, boom, the neurons connected. There it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. I mean,
But yeah,
to sort of very quickly is, the wiring is really something real. There are pathways in the brain that the neurons, which are the conductors of the signals in our brain and the neurotransmitters that carry those signals, what you're doing when she says you're making new wiring is you're making new pathways. It'd be like if you were in the woods and you're breaking new trail, and maybe you can think of it like that. Instead of following the old worn trail that you always have, and you do a little bushwhacking, if you will, and you start to build a new trail, which is the brain is very, what we say, plastic. It means it changes. It can change. You can learn new things, even while you still have the old going on, right? But like she says, I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work. And you have to remember, you've been doing it forever. So you can't expect that it's going to change. Just think of you, Alex. How long did it take for you? I mean, you'd be the poster boy in our program, which we probably can't stand hearing, but it's true. But it didn't take you overnight to get there. I mean, it didn't.
It did. It actually did. I mean, I kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Oh,
And
I know
then
that.
I think at the end in November, I got back from a vacation. I was supposed to run a marathon, and that didn't quite work out. And I just wasn't happy with myself. And something snapped, and I just said, "Okay, that's it. I'm done doing. I'm running every just about every damn day. I'm going to do alternate day fasting." And like I put and I've heard this from other people as well. I had a coach. Her name is Ella Majors. She's online as Sexy Fit Vegan, and her thing was like you're creating these rules around yourself, and they're fake rules. 1,300 calories has to be on my watch, or I'm not happy, or that you're doing this alternate day fasting. And it's like, no, you don't need any of this. You don't need to track any of it. I cannot not track. It didn't happen if I didn't track it. And for me, some of those rules are important, because if I didn't have a rule that said you're done eating at 4:30 and
Frozen.
just don't even look at the fridge, don't go into the kitchen, nothing. If I didn't
I
have that rule, I would go in. I would
We seem
snack
to have
on all
frozen
kinds of
up,
nonsense that I have out there. It also helps that I'm vegan, and like I've somehow mentally just turned off anything that
or maybe
isn't
it's me.
vegan that my wife has. Like there's chocolate in my kitchen right now, and I like chocolate, but it's not vegan. Therefore, I'm not. It's off limits. It doesn't exist. But anything that is vegan, like she just bought some vegan ice cream that's in my freezer back there. I'm going to hunt it down at some point and I'm going to eat it, all of it. So I have to live by these rules. So I don't know
You see, but here,
what to
Alex,
do.
I interrupt you for a moment because you just broke one of the cardinal rules of rational emotive behavior therapy and cognitive is that you have to.
Mm.
Because it's demanding this. I have to. If you close your eye, I told you this the other day, I think. If you close your eyes and you say, I have to, or I want to, there's a difference. And it puts a lot of pressure on you, the have to. And we're always talking to people about their language. Because like she already said, Albert Ellis, the shoulding all over the place. I mean, that is classic Albert Ellis. And the have to is the I must. What we want people to do is to hear our voices or a bell or something go off that, wait, I'm not being very kind to myself by doing this. It doesn't mean that I can't move forward. It's just that I'm making it harder. And a perfect example of this, Alex, is if I'm in a room and I ask with Megan, and I ask people, how hard are you working at losing weight from 0 to 10? Well, the people who are losing the most weight always say 5. And the people who are not losing so much are saying 10. Meaning they're working really, really hard, but they're not losing as much. Well, why is that? One of the things we know is that when they say it's a 10 is because they're making it hard for themselves. They're beating themselves up. They have all or nothing thinking. And the perception is that it's very hard. And it is. They're making it harder. They're depleting themselves. Whereas the people who are losing more weight are saying, no, it's a 5. Because if they step on the scale, it goes up. They just move on.
Mm-hmm.
They don't beat themselves up, and there's no musts and no have tos and no shoulds. This is not simple stuff. It's not. But and I'll put some books into the list as well on this kind of thinking style, because we really need to differentiate between the thoughts and the feelings and the behaviors. And we don't tend to do that. We tend to just go from the thought, oh, I've got a long way to go, to what the hell? And then you go and you have all the vegan ice cream. And that's the consequence of that thought. You've bypassed how it made you feel, the thought. And that's where the mindfulness comes in, because you're slowing down enough that you can see the relationship between the thoughts and the feelings and then the behavior, not skipping the feeling, because the feeling is leading to a consequence that is not what's consistent with your objective. Megan?
Yeah, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. It's like that the fear of letting go of the rules, right? Like I talk about this with clients that are, again, like all along the eating spectrum, whether they're trying to lose weight and they have strict food rules around what they like, when they can eat or what they like, kind of like what you're saying, Alex, or like people who struggle with like other forms of eating issues like anorexia, like restrictive behaviors, binge eating. There's oftentimes like a very common experience of having rules, like rigid kind of hard and fast things I do, things I don't do. And is that helpful? Yes, to some extent. But the hardest part is then like at some point, sometimes those rules again feel psychologically, they almost like backfire on us. And so there has to be some kind of understanding of how does the rule work for you, right? So we have to investigate it a little bit deeper than just having the rule itself, because the scary part about like the rule is, and inherently, again, the rule implies that I don't trust myself to make the decision. I have to have a rule in order to tell myself like, do this or don't do this, right? And the hardest part is like with folks is like letting go, starting to release the grip on the rules and figuring out what happens when I do that. Does my relationship with my body and food, like my fear is that it's going to like implode, right? But does it actually do that? I honestly, in all the years that I've been doing work with people with food and eating issues, not once have I heard someone say that it like imploded on them. They may have engaged in some of the behavior, yes, but did it implode and continue to implode? No, because we came back and we started to talk more about it, and they did more digging and more understanding and had more mindfulness around it. And eventually they find a place where they feel like, okay, if I a belief or a rule around things that are helpful for me towards my health goals or towards my relationship with food or towards my body, if I want to have some structure around that, I am going to mindfully choose what that is and how it works for me. I'm not just going to have these rigid rules because I don't trust myself. And implicitly, then they start to build this trust in their own choices, in their behaviors around what they know is best for them, and their relationships with food and with their bodies ultimately start to improve because they don't feel so kind of
Yeah.
the need to control.
I'm watching the clock and we have about 7 minutes to go. What I'd like to do is switch gears for one moment to just specifically just food. And I would like you, Megan, to just describe the Raisin exercise so that one of the takeaways that people come away from, I mean, there are many here, but something concrete like the Raisin exercise.
Yes.
I've done it 1,000 million times. Go ahead and explain it, Megan, what it is.
Yes. Yes. So we've done the Raisin exercise in one of our our last mindfulness group too. And it was actually a big hit, even though it's been
Truthfully,
long-standing exercise.
I have done this thing 10,000 times and I have
if you
never
haven't heard of the Raisin exercise, you probably live under a rock.
I have done that so many times. And this time when Megan did it with them, they all came back the following week and they were all more mindful about their food. They ate slower. They ate less. It was incredible outcome. Just explain to us, the listeners, what it is, Megan.
It is a great exercise. I've had a similar experience with it.
Okay, so you have 5 minutes, Megan.
Okay, so briefly, I'll just kind of give you the brief. I'm not going to kind of go through the whole exercise. If you're interested in like the idea of this, you can go online and Google Raisin mindfulness exercise, and it will pull up a script for you. I'm sure there's even like MP3s where you can like push play and someone will read it out to you, and you can just have your food. So ideally, what it is, it's a mindfulness of thoughts about food and your behaviors kind of related to food. So it's slowing down your experience of eating so that you can be mindful of things that we typically probably aren't very mindful of at all, like the taste, the texture. You even stop and kind of look at the food and kind of have this very slow process with it. So we start by just using some mindful breathing to ground everybody into the exercise. And then what you have is a raisin or some other piece of food, fruit, whatever it might be, that has kind of like color, a good texture to it. That's usually helpful. So a raisin or like a raspberry, I think somebody used in the group. And so you take this food, this raisin, and you start by, there's prompts to say like, okay, now just like notice, like hold the raisin. Feel what the raisin feels like in your palm. Notice the color, notice the texture. Roll it around in your hand or in your fingers. Notice the weight of it. And then you slowly kind of bring the raisin or the food up to your mouth, and then you put it in your mouth and you don't chew it yet. You just kind of leave it there. And then you notice again, kind of like the taste, the texture in your mouth. And it goes through this very slow process until you start to chew the raisin, and then you notice the flavor, right? And so it's emphasizing the mindfulness skill of noticing, observing and noticing, and then putting language to it. So again, we break this down. It increases that awareness, right, in the moment of what am I experiencing? How would I describe that? And then putting language to it. And so then after the exercise is over and then you swallow the raisin, right? And then we encourage people to think about, to process it for themselves. Like, what was it like? What did you notice? Do you think you could approach a whole meal in that way? And then we challenge folks, as Rich said, to go and do that with a whole meal in between sessions. And people said it made them more aware of what they were eating and how they were eating.
I never saw a group do better with that than the 40 years. This raisin exercise is like Abraham Lincoln, I think, invented it or something. But it's like, it was just remarkable. They ate at their table. They slowed down. They were more mindful. Instead of milliseconds, it slowed it down, and they were, because, and remember, biologically, it takes 20 minutes for the signal from your belly, from your stomach to your brain that you've that you've eaten. So if you eat more calories than you need, but within 20 minutes, less than 20 minutes, your brain's not going to get a signal that you're full. So slowing them down with this, it was just remarkable, unbelievable. It
Yeah.
was great.
It is the seminal kind of like exercise, mindfulness exercise for mindfulness in food, for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure.
And one thing I just kind of want to do like a kind of a recap too of the ways in which mindfulness can be helpful for weight loss, right? Specifically, right? Is exactly what we're saying. This has been kind of embedded in all the conversations we've had, is that it increases your awareness of hunger and fullness cues. So we focus on that in some of the mindfulness groups. Like, is it in describing like what is that hunger? Is the hunger an emotional hunger? Is it a physiological hunger? What is the sense of hunger? And how do you know, right? And then what are your fullness cues? How do you know when it's time to stop versus kind of blowing past the stop sign? So mindfulness can definitely help with that. It can potentially ideally reduce emotional eating too, because as we become more mindful of what is happening in the connections between our brains and our bodies, we become aware of our thoughts, we become more aware of our emotions, we identify triggers, and then ultimately, right, like we create more effective coping mechanisms for reducing emotional eating. And then it helps us, like Rich is saying, like build those key emotional experiences with resiliency and self-compassion, right? Because we know that the weight loss journey is full of peaks and valleys, ups and downs. It can be a roller coaster. It's not like a straight, uphill trajectory. And there's a lot of learning that happens. So it helps us withstand the times and persevere through the times that don't feel so good, right? Like when we step on the scale and we did everything right the week before and the scale says up 2 pounds, like what happened? Instead of we say this all the time, instead of getting devastated by that experience, we learn how to regulate our emotion so that we can be disappointed and we can move forward, right? Like we continue on with the next thing. We don't fall off track. And so it helps us prevent relapses. We can't always prevent lapses where we fall off track, but we can definitely try to minimize or prevent relapses where we're, completely off the train.
I think you said something, you use the word disappointment, and I like that word too, because it's very temporary compared to devastating, which is how some people feel. So we have just 5 minutes. Number one, I have a few announcements that I want to make. But first, what I'd like to do, Megan, is just ask you if you have anything else you'd like to share with us about what we've talked about this evening. Anything else you want to tell the listeners that is important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like we said at the very start of this talk, mindfulness is helpful for eating issues, improving your relationship with food and your body, your overall health and wellness. And there are very specific mindfulness, evidence-based approaches that utilize mindfulness for other mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, addiction. So if any of this is resonating for you and you also struggle with any of those issues, panic, anxiety, depression, please know that there are professionals out there where you don't have to go this alone. Please utilize your resources, seek out somebody who maybe specializes in the treatment of those conditions. And if you like the mindfulness approach, see if they also can kind of integrate that into meet you where you're at and what you're looking for.
Thank you. So we'll put Megan's website is it called Show Notes? Is that what
Show
it's
Notes.
Called? Show Notes, yeah. So, do you want to say your website real fast? Maybe people...
Sure, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It's www.drpietrucha, so DrPietrucha.com. And if you're interested in working with me, or if there's anything that you enjoyed of what I had to say, there's a place on my webpage where you can contact me and just shoot me a little email, and I'd be happy to get back to you. Or join the groups with Rich, and I'll see you there too.
So then the other if this interests you and you really are like, this is sort of got you going, Megan is leading a 4-week workshop at Transformation Weight Control at our program starting on Wednesday, June 4th at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And it's 4-week workshop. And if you go to our website, transformationweightcontrol.com, you will find information about that, and there's a video of Megan describing it, and there's a place to register. And if you go to that website, you can also get in touch with me directly, Rich at transformationweightcontrol.com, or make an appointment with me at no charge, and I'll speak with you. But Megan's workshops have been very, very effective, and that's why we're doing it again. And I think if this whetted your appetite, speak a little bit, then you're not going to have much of an opportunity opportunity for that. And of course I'm biased, but I don't think you really will have the kind of opportunity with the kind of professional and experience that Megan has with mindfulness and weight loss and all, because this is what she does. And I have been around the block a long time. And when I'm talking and interviewing psychologists and therapists, it takes me just a few minutes to know whether they really get it or not. And I will tell you that Megan really gets it, and she will help you. So check the website, transformationweightcontrol.com. She starts Wednesday, June 4th, is 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'd be happy. You don't have to be a member of the program. You can just attend her workshop, and I think it would serve you well to do that. So we have a personal stylist coming up, Chelsea back, and she's going to talk about clothing and fabric and everything as your present weight, as you're losing weight, when you get to your goal weight. She's going to talk all about what to do with all the clothes in your closet and all that kind of jazz. And she's fantastic, like Megan, and she's energetic, and you are going to learn a lot. You thought you knew something about clothing, wait till because everybody puts clothing on in the morning. Chelsea is really terrific, so look for that. And then you can look for conversations just between me and Alex as well, individually. But again, Megan's workshop is Wednesday, June 4th, 6 p.m. Eastern time, transformationweightcontrol.com. And I would encourage you to think about it. If this really caught your interest, because you're going to have 4 weeks, and then we'll repeat it again because we've already repeated it. This is not the first time she's doing it. This is another repeat of it, and sometimes the same people attend because they want more.
Mm-hmm. The first 4 weeks was kind of like a basic introduction, and we did a lot of exercises. We will incorporate a lot of exercises into this one too. So it's not just like learning about it. You will be doing mindfulness and finding ways of making it very applicable, very user-friendly to you. Kind of like we talked about today, was just starting with the breathing, right? And incorporating ways that you can be more mindful into your everyday life. This time around, we're going to focus on radical acceptance. So there'll be kind of like a twist on it with like a focus on acceptance, the acceptance part of mindfulness.
But people didn't have to attend the first.
No, you do
workshop.
not have to attend the first time to be participating at this go around. No, it's separate.
It's really it's on Zoom, it's online. You can do it in your jammies at home. You could be lying.
That's the only way to do it.
That's the only way to do it, right? I look at somebody in the room one time, in the Zoom room, I go, "Are you in bed?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." It's a new world. It's a whole new world. Anyway, Megan, thank you so much, really. And Megan is going to be coming back because she's going to continue a little bit of this, but she's also going to talk more from the sports psychology part of her brain, the other side, and talk about performance enhancement and how to do that. Just watch.
That sounds exciting.
It's going to be great. And
I can't wait.
Alex is going to be building a page on our website because this is only episode 3. So once we get more going, we're going to put the whole schedule up and you'll see Megan's name on there again. So check us out. So Megan, I see you every week, but it's still a pleasure and it's always fun. And it just is. You know what, Alex? It proves how smart I am because I got her to come work with us at Transformation Weight Control. That's what it really shows.
That's that.
I'm taking full credit for
it. And the mantra is, when you hire people, you need to hire people that are smarter than you are.
Yeah, she is really she's a crackerjack. She's really terrific, and I think everybody, if you listen to this or watched it, you got to know that that's the truth. Really appreciate it. You're making the TWC podcast even better. So thanks.
Thank you for
very
having
much.
me.
And say hi to Grace for me, her 4-year-old, who's really sweet, very cute. I have a little crush on her daughter. She's a very, very sweet little kid.
I often bring up stories related to my daughter in the mindfulness groups because raising a toddler takes a lot of mindfulness skills. I'm honing my mindfulness on a daily basis these days.
I can imagine.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. It was terrific. Thanks so much, Megan.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.